so as to make them pay. I drove to the beach and speedily charged my wagon with as large a load as prudence advised me. The firm of Howard, Millen and Company proved to have quarters in a frame shack on what is now Montgomery Street. It was only a short haul, but a muddy one. Nearly opposite their store a new wharf was pushing its way out into the bay. I could see why this and other firms clung so tenaciously to their locations on the rivers of bottomless mud in preference to moving up into the drier part of town. I enjoyed my day hugely. My eminent position on the driver's seat, eminent both actually and figuratively, gave me a fine opportunity to see the sights and to enjoy the homage men seemed inclined to accord the only wagon in town. The feel of warm air was most grateful. Such difficulties as offered served merely to add zest to the job. At noon I ate some pilot bread and a can of sardines bought from my employers. About 2 o'clock the wind came up from the sea and the air filled with the hurrying clouds of dust. In my journeys back and forth I had been particularly struck by the bold, rocky hill that shut off the view toward the north. Atop this hill had been rigged a 2-armed semaphore, which, one of the clerks told me, was used to signal the sight of ships coming in the Golden Gate. The arms were variously arranged according to the rig or kind of vessel. Every man, every urchin, every Chinaman, even, knew the meaning of these various signals. A year later I was attending a theatrical performance in the Jenny Lind Theater on the Plaza. In the course of the play, an actor rushed on frantically, holding his arms outstretched in a particularly wooden fashion, and uttering the lines, "What means this, my lord?" "A side-wheel steamer," piped up a boy's voice from the gallery. Well, about 3 o'clock of this afternoon, as I was about delivering my 5th load of goods, I happened to look up just as the semaphore arms hovered on the rise. It seemed that every man on the street must have been looking in the same direction, for instantly a great shout went up. A side-wheel steamer, the Oregon! At once the streets were alive with men hurrying from all directions toward the black rocks at the foot of Telegraph Hill, where, it seems, the steamer's boats were expected to land. Flags were run up on all sides. Firearms were let off. A warship in the harbor broke out her bunting and fired a salute. The decks of the steamer, as she swept into view, were black with men. Her yards were gay with color. Uptown, some devoted soul was ringing a bell, turning it away over and over, to judge by the sounds. I pulled up my mules and watched the vessel swing down through the ranks of the shipping and come to anchor. We had beaten our comrades by a day. At 5 o'clock a small boy boarded me. "You're to drive the mules up to McGlynn's and unhitch them and leave them," said he. "I'll show you the way." "Where's McGlynn?" I asked. "He's getting his mail." We drove to a corral and 3 well-pitched tents down in the southern edge of town. Here a sluggish stream lost its way in a swamp of green hummocky grass. I turned out the mules in the corral and hung up the harness. "McGlynn says you're to go to the post office, and he'll pay you there," my guide instructed me. The post office proved to be a low adobe 1-story building, with the narrow veranda typical of its kind. A line of men extended from its door and down the street as far as the eye could reach. Some of them had brought stools or boxes and were comfortably reading scraps of paper. I walked down the line. A dozen from the front I saw Johnny standing. This surprised me, for I knew he could not expect any mail by this steamer. Before I had reached him, he had finished talking to a stranger and had yielded his place. "Hello," he greeted me. "How are you getting on?" "So," I replied. "I'm looking for a man who owes me $25. "Well, he's here," said Johnny confidently. Everybody in town is here." We found McGlynn in line about a block down the street. When he saw me coming, he pulled his fat buckskin bag from his breeches pocket, opened its mouth, and shook a quantity of its contents, by guess, into the palm of his hand. "There you are," said he. "That's near enough. I'm a pretty good guesser. I hope you took care of the mules all right. You ought to. You're from a farm." "I fixed 'em." "And the mud? How many times did you get stuck?" "Not at all." He looked at me with surprise. "Would you think of that now?" said he. "You must have loaded her light." "I did." "Did you get all the goods over?" "Yes." "Well, I'll acknowledge you're a judgmatical young man. And if you want a job with me, I'll let that lawyer go I spoke to the judge about. He handed it to me, didn't he?" He laughed heartily. "No? Well, you're right. A man's a fool to work for anyone but himself. Where's your bag? Haven't any? How do you carry your dust? Haven't any. I forgot, you're a tenderfoot, of course." He opened his buckskin sack with his teeth and poured back the gold from the palm of his hand. Then he searched for a moment in all his pockets and produced a most peculiar chunk of gold metal. It was nearly as thick as it was wide, shaped roughly into an octagon, and stamped with initials. This he handed to me. "It's about a $50 slug," said he. "You can get it weighed. Give me the change next time you see me." "But I may leave for the mines tomorrow," I objected. "Then leave the change with Jim Reckett of the El Dorado." "How do you know I'll leave it?" I asked curiously. "I don't," replied McGlynn bluntly. "But if you need $25 worse than you do a decent conscience, then John A. McGlynn isn't the man to deny you." Johnny and I left for the hotel. "I didn't know you expected any mail," said I. "I don't." "But I thought I saw you in line." "Oh, yes. When I saw the mail sacks, it struck me that there might be quite a crowd, so I came up as quickly as I could and got in line. There were a number before me, but I got a place pretty well up in front. Sold the place for $5, and only had to stand there about an hour at that." "Good head," I admired. "I'd never have thought of it." "How have you gotten on?" "Pretty rotten," confessed Johnny. "I tried all morning to find a decent opportunity to do something or deal in something, and then I got mad and plunged in for odd jobs. I've been a regular errand boy. I made $2 carrying a man's bag up from the ship." "How much all told?" "15. I suppose you got your pile." "That 25 you saw me get is the size of it." Johnny brightened. We moved up closer in a new intimacy and sense of comradeship over delinquency. It relieved both to feel that the other two had failed. To enter the plaza we had to pass one of the larger of the gambling places. "I'm going in there," said Johnny suddenly. He swung through the open doors and I followed him. The place was comparatively deserted, owing probably to the distribution of mail. We had a full space to look about us, and I was never more astonished in my life. The outside of the building was rough and unfinished as a barn, having nothing but size to attract or recommend. The interior was the height of lavish luxury. A polished mahogany bar ran down one side, backed by huge gilt-framed mirrors, before which were pyramided fine glasses and bottles of liquor. The rest of the wall space was thickly hung with more plate mirrors, dozens of well-executed oil paintings, and strips of tapestry. At one end was a small raised stage on which lolled half a dozen darkies with banjos and tambourines. The floor was covered with a thick velvet carpet. Easy chairs, some of them leather upholstered, stood about in every available corner. Heavy chandeliers of glass, with hundreds of dangling crystals and prisms, hung from the ceiling. The gambling tables, a half a dozen in number, were arranged in the open floor space in the center. Altogether, it was a most astounding contrast in its sheer luxury and gorgeous furnishings to the crudity of the town. I became acutely conscious of my muddy boots, my old clothes, my unkempt hair, my red shirt, and the armament strapped about my waist. A relaxed, subdued air of idleness pervaded the place. The gamblers lounged back of their tables, sleepy-eyed and listless. On tall stools their lookouts yawned behind papers. One of these was a woman, young, pretty, most attractive in the soft, flaring, flouncy costume of that period. A small group of men stood at the bar. One of the barkeepers was mixing drinks, pouring the liquid at arm's length from one tumbler to another in a long parabolic curve, and without spilling a drop. Only one table was doing business, and that with only 3 players. Johnny pushed rapidly toward this table, and I, a little diffidently, followed. The game was roulette. Johnny and the dealer evidently recognized each other, for a flash of the eye passed between them, but they gave no other sign. Johnny studied the board a moment, then laid $22 in coin on one of the numbers. The other players laid out small bags of gold dust. The wheel spun, and the ball rolled. 2 of the men lost. Their dust was emptied into a drawer beneath the table, and the bags tossed back to them. The third had won. The dealer deftly estimated the weight of his bet, lifting it in the flat of his left hand, then spun several gold pieces toward the winner. He seemed quite satisfied. The gambler stacked a roll of $20 pieces, added 1 to them, and thrust them at Johnny. I had not realized that the astounding luck of winning off a single number had befallen him. 10-1, $220, he muttered to me. The other 3 players were laying their bets for the next turn of the wheel. Johnny swept the gold pieces into his pocket and laid back the original stake even. He lost. Thereupon he promptly arose and left the building.